Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. Today, we are going to explore a little bit of North America circa 3000 AD. I've noticed that whenever I start talking about future astral projections, or indeed astral projections in general, I start having more of them. So, having this channel is just one more benefit, not only for those who wish to learn astral projection and to hear about mine, but also for myself to enjoy more and interesting astral projections. This particular projection will be called North America circa 3000 AD, or La Estancia Bonita. Last Monday, I had a astral projection, and I decided to project 1,000 years into the future. And shortly, we will get into this world, at least this tiny part of the world, about 1,000 years into the future. Before we get started, I just want to have a quick couple notes for the newer people, or especially or for people who have not astral projected as of yet, just so they understand some of the things that they might have questions about otherwise. Remember, when you astral project into the future, far enough into the future, you can often be seen and felt by living people. Next, you can usually spend more time there while only minutes transpire back in the present. For instance, you might spend an hour or two, 1,000 years up the line, while only a few minutes transpires back here in the present. Next, communication is by telepathy, which comes quite in handy when you're dealing with aliens, but also comes in handy when you're dealing with the future. This society that I met 1,000 years in the future, their language, I suspect, would have been in a large degree unintelligible to people of the 21st century. We have to remember that languages are living things. They change, they evolve. Imagine someone who lived just 200 years ago coming to this time and hearing words like social media, Bitcoin, Facebook, social distancing, baby mama. They might even recognize some of these words as English words, but the context would be completely lost on them. I could see a man from the year 1700 just trying to listen to a couple teenagers talking, having virtually no idea what their conversation was about. But now project that 1,000 years into the future. You've had 1,000 years of language evolving. I have written this once again. I have to translate telepathy into modern day languages. This culture had, and this language had elements of Spanish and English. So just to get a little bit of a flavor of it, I've included a little bit of Spanish in here too, along with the English, just to try to give some basic idea as to the nature of the speech. Okay, well, those are some of the things I wanted to cover before I get into it. So now let's get into the actual experience and let's explore North America about 1,000 years into the future. Now, as I flew towards a wooded area, I projected about 1,000 years into the future. I experienced my usual moment of blackness. When I regained consciousness, I saw in the distance what looked like a series of white pointed tents all together. My first thought was that I had sighted a fairground or a similar temporary collection of people for an event. However, as I flew closer, I saw that the tents were actually all together, forming a large, odd looking shaped, it was a U shaped type building. And these tents were on top these tent objects were on top of the roof. I landed a short distance away in an unoccupied corner of what appeared to be a large farm or plantation. Groups of workers were busily harvesting a long root like vegetable. To a suburban boy like myself, they looked like a mix between a carrot and a potato. Each worker had a wicker basket, which, when filled, was emptied into unmanned vehicles that followed the lines of workers closely behind. The vehicles had wings with mounted solar cells for propulsion. Each worker wore light colored homespun garments and straw hats to protect them from the bright sun. I noticed some were barefoot while others wore sandals. On the far side of the field, I saw a house that I assumed was housing for the agricultural workforce. And there was actually a series of wooden houses. They didn't look like much from where I was standing, but I thought I would perhaps get a closer look at them later. For now, I was more interested in investigating the curious large building that I had seen before I landed. I had made my way up to about 50 yards or 45 meters from the main house unseen. The large structure rested on a high plateau overlooking the field. And one thing I wanted to mention was when I was in the 21st century, this area was heavily wooded. But as I arrived and regained consciousness, most of the woods was now gone. And it looked much more, I don't know, grassland like, let's say, with very, very few trees. At any rate, I was standing outside of this house, still hidden, when I spied a man and a woman dressed in fabrics that shimmered in the sun. One minute, the loose fitting shirts and shorts both appeared white. The next, silver, then gray, and even black. I hypothesized that they were designed for comfort, changing colors based on the amount of light and heat energy shining upon them. I next directed my gaze to the main structure. The roof looked like it had a series of sails, as I had seen from far away, towering above it. A gelatinous substance flowed over the top of the building and down the walls, changing color as the solar radiation impacting upon it waxed and waned. The entire complex was only a single story in a U shape with a central courtyard that I had spotted before landing. Based on its size, I figured it was a small conference or perhaps community center. I decided it was time to approach these two inhabitants outside the central building. I conjured up garments similar to what they were wearing and started walking towards them. The pair looked me over with surprise on their faces, but received me with what I interpreted as cautious goodwill. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a drone like object floating silently, making its way through the sky until it arrived about 2 stories over our heads. My 21st century mind immediately thought of a spy or even a defense drone, but I forced my preconceptions aside as I was in a distant century now. I shouldn't allow my paranoid present day thought process to prejudge another society. Buenos dias, senor. The 30ish man spoke. Welcome to La Estancia Bonita. Muchas gracias, I beamed back. The man was shocked at my telepathic response. So the woman next to him spoke next. Are you a wandering holy man? I sensed the awe in her thoughts, and I decided to follow the path of least resistance. I find that sometimes you have to think on your feet in these travels. Yes, I am, I answered. I've come to visit your lovely home. Me llamo Señor Ricardo. The man found his voice again. My apologies. My name is Alejandro, and my companion is Rixa. If the district center had informed us of your arrival, we'd have prepared a more fitting reception for such an honored guest. The drone hovering above us moved off silently, heading in the direction of the fields. I guess I was no longer a suspicious visitor, but now an honored and respected guest. Obviously, I had no knowledge of any district center, so I thought a change of subject was best. I was admiring your roof. Oh, yes, Alejandro brightened. Our bioenergetic gel is of the highest quality, and it is Class 1A self-replicating por 10 años before recharging is required. Alejandro, Rixa interrupted. Are we to leave a holy man out in the winter heat? As Rixa spoke, I got the clear telepathic impression that this North America was warmer than the one I'd left in the early 21st century. Scanning her mind, I couldn't even find a memory of snow or ice going back to her time as a small child. Further scanning of her mind revealed that what was once the United States and its familiar state boundaries were now long gone and replaced by smaller areas that they called districts. My best estimate of the geography would put her district near what we had once known as northeastern Tennessee, an area not known for its large snowfalls, but not exactly a stranger to snow and ice either. Rixa had no concept of a federal authority. Most decisions were made locally, with greater issues involving the district. Even more alarming, the world she knew was much less densely populated than my 21st century. I couldn't be sure, as she had no worldwide population numbers in her mind. But I'd be surprised if this world had more than 1 billion inhabitants, nowhere near the close to 8 billion that we have today on this blue and green globe. I was taking all this new information in as I was guided to the doorway. I hesitated before walking through, as I could see and sense an electric field of some kind that was surging about the door opening. My hosts looked at me expectantly as I took a deep astral breath and walked through. Ants crawled over my astral form as I passed through the odd portal. The sterile field still bothers me even now, Rixa said. She'd obviously noticed my discomfiture. I suppose our older model isn't as efficient as some of the newer estancias you've visited. I smiled in response. I find this gesture covers up areas of ignorance quite well. Doubtless, this electric field was meant as a means of decontamination. I thought back to 2020 and how we could have used this type of technology ourselves. I was seated at a polymer table while Alejandro placed a glass of water and some small brown flaky cakes before me. Since I didn't eat or drink in my astral form, I thought more questions were in order. I noticed your crop is coming in nicely, I said. Oh, yes, Alejandro agreed. The cassava is doing very well this year. We're looking forward to the trade fair very much this season. The workers aren't the best we've ever had, but they know what it's like to be turned out, and no one wants to die like that. Both Rixa and Alejandro laughed at this joke. I smiled weakly. In Alejandro's mind, a worker turned out wasn't just fired. He was sent out into the wilderness in between the estancias to starve. Finding work on another estancia was difficult, but the alternative was starvation in the middle of nowhere. I was liking this future a little bit less already. But before I left, I wanted to see more of this building. My second thought was that I was pretty sure that cassava was a subtropical plant. I recalled seeing it on some Nat Geo special or other. If it was being cultivated here in the middle of North America in what was once known as northeastern Tennessee, then the weather had turned decidedly hotter. Lastly, I observed Alejandro picturing a large trade fair with hundreds of visitors in his mind. He saw his crop being traded for other foods, clothing, goods, and some silver coins and small bars. I wondered whatever became of the various cryptocurrencies that so consumed the attention of people in my time. At my request, they led me from room to room. In all, I counted 10 unremarkable bedrooms and at least 3 separate living and eating areas with small individual baths. I saw no evidence of television or other broadcast entertainment. Electric lights came on automatically from the floor and ceiling as we entered an area and switched off as we left. Along the way, I was introduced to a number of additional women, a few children, and men. Their names escape me now, as I've always been horrible at recalling such information. How many people live in this house? I inquired. Rixa looked at me strangely, and I knew I'd made some kind of mistake. Well, nuestra familia has currently 7 women, 9 men, and 4 children. Unfortunately, we lost 2 men last month. Both Holton and Alfredo had to be turned out because they were discovered to be sterile. Once again, I scanned Rixa's mind. It seemed in this century many men were sterile. It was the law or custom, I couldn't see which, that determined that only virile men and fertile women could be housed in the various estancias. I was aware of falling sperm counts in men in the early 21st century. Perhaps the problem had continued and exacerbated in such a way that the population of Earth had dropped precipitously. I looked for more details in her mind on this problem, but Rixa had nothing definite other than vague ancient rumors and legends. These people were unlike us today. They lived much of their life within the territory of the estancia. I saw them going to trade fairs around 4 times a year, but that, for the most part, was their traveling. So they were much more homebodies. They weren't the worldwide travelers that we here in the 21st century are today. At any rate, I was considering all of this, and I looked for more details in her mind, and I saw that they were engaged in something that we call polyamory today, which is relationships in which many men and women share one another on a more or less equal basis. There isn't the pair bonding that we typically have today that we call marriage. With uncertain male fertility, I suppose that what to us is an unorthodox reproductive strategy might make the most sense in such a situation and in such a time. As I mulled over everything that I had just learned, it suddenly occurred to me that I hadn't seen anyone with white hair, signifying age, since I got there. Were these people turned out too? I try not to judge a time or an alien place, because after all, I'm not sure how our civilization would stack up if we were judged by people from other times and other places. But I couldn't help but be disappointed by some of what I had seen here in this future world. But before I could ask anything more, I felt myself being pulled back to my body in 2020, and I chose not to resist the call. Well, that was the experience. And it was certainly an unexpected one. But then again, most of my future travels always leave me with more questions than answers. And they're never quite what I expect them to be. As a fan of Star Trek, I always hope that I'll encounter some civilization with starships whizzing about and transporters transporting people instantly around the globe. Unfortunately, I have not seen such a possible future yet. Perhaps I will sometime in the future. If you liked this experience, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. I mean, why not? It's free. If you have subscribed, hit the bell, and you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. And I always love to read your comments and to answer your questions. And as always, I will see you on the astral plane.